I've asked Mr. Fathiana to
kind of which policies and so on and so forth. As I keep saying, there are details in the appendices available if you want to look at those kind of things. So it's very visual that countries that have resilience, in simple terms, countries that have an ability to absorb and respond effectively to shocks fare better in the medium term. Medium term means 5 years after the shock. So both in terms of GDP per capita, extreme poverty, environmental performance, countries who have actually invested in people, in resilience, in improving the structural problems, actually fare better when they are faced by shocks. This is the evidence from the region. This is another way of, just to make the point home, because we're talking about COVID context, so I thought I'll pull out at least one graph for pandemics. So this is a similar graph presented differently, but only for pandemics. So pandemics have a far more severe economic and social impact in countries with pre-existing structural vulnerabilities. So there are 3 examples I've taken: public health spending, work arrangements, whether they're formal versus informal, and the quality of infrastructure. So the blue lines are showing if the countries are spending higher public health spending, have formal work arrangements, and have high quality infrastructure. And brown is the other way around. And I've looked 3 indicators here for illustration: GDP per capita, consumption impact, and human capital. And again, I don't need to explain, I can just simply show you those countries that have high public health spending, their GDP per capita improves better compared to those that don't. Same is the case for consumption, same is the case for human capital formation. So what are the key lessons? And as I said, there are literally dozens of these kind of graphs that are available in the appendix in the report itself. I thought, well, let's draw out key lessons for today. First lesson: respond strongly and swiftly to shocks to safeguard sustainable development. This is a fundamental lesson. You really have to set aside some of the conventional economic wisdom. If it calls for fiscal spending, do the fiscal spending, deal with the consequences later. Unconventional monetary policies, for instance, have been used in 2008 crisis globally, right? This is showing the impact of these kind of policies, the potential boost to sustainable development from resilient enhancing policies. Again, 5 years after the crisis, more resilient economies relative to less resilient economies. So we can actually see that those countries that actually responded aggressively, their GDP per capita was 3 percentage points higher. In case of financial crisis, roughly the same for natural disasters, and about 5% we set for human capital environment performance. This is just another way of demonstrating if countries respond strongly and quickly and to shocks, well, they reap actually the benefits in the medium term for sure. Lesson number 2, and this is something I think Dr. Akhtar was touching upon as well. We need to move away from very conventional optimization approach to policy making, the trade-off approach. The first sort of conditions we teach students in classes. We need to get a much more risk management approach into policy making. It's a very different framework and model. Maybe they can have a separate seminar, how countries and academics now are revisiting the very economic theoretical foundation for policies to actually bring in risk elements. These are just examples what we see from the data. So you have to have coping with risk ability and preparing for the crisis. Develop early warning system, climate resilient infrastructure, adaptive social protection, and so on and so forth. Right? Third lesson is we just wanted to plot what is the performance of countries across different categories. So the orange bar on the left is the least developed countries in Asia and the Pacific. The middle one, which is yellow, is other developing countries in Asia Pacific, and we compared them with the OECD countries, the dark brown bar. And we again selected few indicators, so social protection spending, infrastructure quality, economic complexity as examples. And again, it's pretty visual. Those countries that actually, so developing countries are, least developed countries are least developed because they don't have enough exchange flexibility. They're not spending enough on social protection. They have poor quality infrastructure. Their sovereign credit rating is poor. Their economic complexity actually is pretty far off. So these are the ideas and indicators of the kind of policy areas policymakers should zoom in if they want to improve the prospects of their countries. So this is all learned from the past. So how do we translate all that learning into the future? What elements of the policies we're proposing that countries now pursue as they move forward? So we propose what we call a build forward policy package, which looks like this. This is a 46 country macroeconometric model. has three components. One is social services, which essentially has two subcomponents: access to healthcare and social protection flow. Second is digital examples of that. And third is a very detailed module of green development. And we have equations for biodiversity, subsidies, carbon pricing, clean energy and energy efficiency, and so on and so forth. And the model is quite flexible, which means it can be adapted to different country circumstances, different policy priorities. If country X, like say Pakistan, wants to focus only on green development aspects and carbon taxation, well, the model can modify that, and you can get a lot of insights and details by plugging in actually those kind of features for the Pakistani data. We actually held a joint workshop with STPI on 25th November. So we engaged with Planning Commission economists, and Sajid told as well, Dr. Imtiaz is here, maybe his team is familiar. We have basically took them on a training to teach them how to use the model in EVs and play for themselves and figure out different policies. So here is some illustrative example of that. So transformations offer notable socioeconomic and environment benefits. This for South Asia is sub-region 4. So black bar is ambitious spending, and we define ambitious spending means countries actually invest whatever the needed amount is for SDG investments. And SCAP has done SDG costing in 2019, so we have those kind of estimates already. So we assume, what if countries actually invest all that is needed, what happens? So number of poor people go down drastically, 120 million by 2030. Inequality goes down, air quality improves, carbon emission improves, and you can pick up other indicators as well that are in the model. Business as usual, and I'll show you what that means, which means if you continue to spend what you're spending at this point in time, on average, the region is spending about 38% of what is needed on average. Some countries are investing far less, some are more. On average, it's about 1/3. And if they do that, of course, the benefits are not as stark as you see in the initial investment. Now, as an economist, we understand nothing comes for free. If you want to invest, if you want to spend on those priority areas, you need resources, financial resources. So first of all, we see the impact on the debt position of countries. And our estimates, about 66% of SDGs will have to be financed from fiscal resources. So the major impact of investing in SDGs is going to come from fiscal side, and it will have an impact on debt, and as a consequence, debt sustainability. So on average, the developing Asia Pacific will experience its debt to GDP ratio go from about 50% to more than 72, 73%. If you want to do just the Build Forward Better package, or also include the impact of the recent COVID spendings as well. The right-hand panel is the same one for South and Southwest Asia as a region. And again, as I said, if you want to do the Pakistan estimates, the model allows you to do that as well. These are significant increases in about, in this modeling work, at least about 10 years. Where are you going to come up with resources to finance this increased debt? That is, of course, ultimate policy question. And I'll be very quick on that before we conclude. I won't go into the details of all the policies, simply mention them. So this is how the fiscal situation looks in the Asia Pacific region. Obviously, it has worsened quite a bit. It was close to about 1.5% on average before the pandemic, and now it's hovering close to 6% and likely to come down in the next few years. So fiscal deficit is likely to remain elevated for the time being. So on the one hand, you want to spend more, which is going to increase the debt level. At the same time, your fiscal space has already been constrained because you're already running high deficits. So you really need to think out of the box where you're going to come from these resources. And to add insult to injury, this is, to me, one of the most fundamental and important graphs. And it took us really quite some effort to put it together. So I show it in several workshops, especially when talking about country level work that we do. Left-hand panel is the additional SDG investment costing we have done, in some country cases, the country level. So Pakistan, this is about 16.9% of the GDP, which is very similar to IMF estimates, not surprisingly, because when we were doing the estimates, we actually engaged with ADB, IMF, World Bank, several other agencies. So the methodologies were not that different in many cases. The advantage of our approach is it covers all areas of SDG. So 16, how much countries are actually doing? So we did the mapping of that, where the financial resources are coming and where are they going towards different SDG areas. So we do two scenarios on the right-hand side. If we assume the financial flows going towards SDGs are going to increase by 2%, which is the actual growth in the last 5 years. Between 16 and 19, Pakistan is spending less than 1% of GDP. If you really give them benefit of doubt, certainly they're going to start spending a lot toward SDGs, and they more than double the financial flows. They go from 2% to 5%. They'll still reach not even 3%. So basically, it's an impossible task. I don't think so. Many countries in the region, including Pakistan, stands a chance to achieve SDGs if we only look at one aspect, which is lack of financing available. So this is a seriously fundamental constraint a lot of countries are facing. What are the options? This is where I'll be very quick, and because we can have several detailed seminars on each one of them. 3 broader categories of work that we have defined, depending on the areas of work we're working with different countries, different subregions. First one, to me, the important one is fiscal position. We need to enhance fiscal space. Several opportunities are there. We are doing some work, especially in terms of tackling illicit financial flows, for instance, reprioritizing public spending. I keep hearing from developing countries, including Pakistan, that we don't have sufficient fiscal resources. And I always say, I don't think so. We are choosing as a policy issue not to spend on SDGs and continue to spend on defense. It's a policy choice. So if we're choosing to be a security state, reality, we just don't admit it in most public forums. We need to come to grips with the reality. You on something which is not supporting SDGs and then somehow expect to have come resources and achieve SDGs, right? Because the other option is you're simply going to keep on complaining, I don't have sufficient resources. So I doubt that. So there are a lot of risks here, and we are working, as I said, in some areas with some countries. The second category is where we are quite actively working now is innovative and sustainable financing instruments. The 2 key areas are thematic bonds, especially green bonds, and mostly recently social bonds as well. Working with several ASEAN countries, and debt for climate swaps. We're working with a lot of Pacific Island economies in these areas. These are in a way untapped potential markets where you can raise a lot of funding, which is not happening at the moment. There are huge pension funds in the region, which are sitting on piles and piles of assets, and they're looking for investments. Dr. Akhtar referred to that, ESG kind of investments. The frameworks, the standards, the taxonomies are not there, which can attract those kind of investments in those areas. So for Indonesia, for instance, we are working with Luxembourg because the investors want to invest there and simply trying to facilitate those kind of things. Carbon pricing is another area we are quite actively working, again, with ASEAN economies. And these are some examples of regional cooperation which we are promoting, including on debt architecture and debt sustainability issues. We are holding a global conference in March 2022 with Pacific leaders. And then there are a lot of work we're doing on standardizing, in a way, sustainable financing, ESG investments kind of frameworks, both of thematic bonds and ESG investments also. And same thing for debt swaps. So bottom line, last slide. Policymakers should assess the wider risk assessment, wider risk landscape, and focus on reducing setbacks, which essentially means building resilience, as well as accelerating progress. Bulk of macroeconomic literature and the bulk of focus of policymakers tends to be on GDP growth, how we can grow faster. And they tend to forget it is very important to have the ability to reduce a setback as and when you encounter shocks, as COVID just made it very amply clear. So for that, the bottom line, the build forward package essence is basically invest in people and planet. I personally think, and this is a research theme we have been pushing quite deliberately in our research in ASCAP, and pandemic makes it a more stark, that we really need to revisit and rethink the development theory in many ways. Old school of focus only on economic growth and then somehow redistribute that pie. Then deal with the economic environment consequences. It's a very old version of the thinking. We really have to simultaneously consider these multiple dimensions and figure out the trade-offs that are involved as and when we pursue them. And bilkul ho gaya ji, bilkul ho gaya. And I have briefly mentioned several policy options as well, both on the fiscal side and on the financing side for your consideration. Happy to discuss further. Here are some resources. Most of this work is drawn from the 2021 issue of Economic and Social Survey Asia Pacific, and some financing work is actually discussed in detail in our Financing for Development series number 4, which was just published in October a couple of months ago. Thank you once again, Sajid. I'm sure in his presentation, Sajid will show, hopefully, some of the translation of the modeling work that we have done for Pakistan and what kind of results we see in case of Pakistan. Thank you once again for the opportunity for this collaboration. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Hamza. ये हो गया है, हमने नहीं कहा था, ये किसी और ने कहा.
I know, just kidding.
and thank you for a very wonderful presentation where you have consumed much of my time as well. So not left much to add on this one, but it was a very well consumed time. I mean, you really set the context, a very broader context for the discussion that we will be having, but it will be challenging now we will be challenging the summary skills of our panelists, how they can kind of in 7 minutes they can bring. But let me just quickly run down. I'll reduce my time. So you see, please, screen. Great, thank you. So I'll just run down on what we have done. These are exactly the 3 key messages that I think are echoing across all 3 presentations so far. Financing needs are huge, fiscal space is low, and this really goes back to what Dr. Hamza was saying, that priorities matter, policies matter, and I think they matter more when you have a very limited resources. So what you prioritize to spend those resources really matters. And definitely the key message is coming that we need to adopt SDGs as the central guiding framework, taking us to inclusive, green, and forward-looking recovery. So this is just a quick summary of what we have done in our work. Hamza has already laid it down very well, so I'll just skip and move forward. The broader idea is it proposes some possible options to enhance fiscal space as well as to align recovery to SDGs agenda, particularly done for Pakistan. These are 2 studies and 1 macroeconomic model that came out of this 1.5-year work. Pakistan responding to the pandemic put in place a fiscal stimulus of 1.2 trillion, and according to UNESCAP's, it was roughly half of what was required, given the low social protection, higher prevalence of poverty, higher was needed. But definitely, as I told in earlier, under IMF program of facing a very tight fiscal and monetary policies, this was much Pakistan could do. But exactly this was worth doing. I'll just give you one scenario, that if you can see the red blocks at the bottom, the circles, the no fiscal support, that actually aligns. What if there was no fiscal stimulus Pakistan didn't have put in place? So it really, if you can see the first bar, minus 3.7, the loss of GDP to the base was minus 3.7 instead of reported by the government minus 0.48. There are debates though that was it the higher number or lower. The fiscal stimulus contributed, and most of them came from, the biggest impact was coming from the social transfers, the social spendings that government did have. In absence of any fiscal support, poverty would have been higher, unemployment would have been higher. So it means spending on people, the social spending has a very strong case. And this is what again goes back to the point that Dr. Hamza said, that COVID-19 has highlighted that health is a macroeconomic crisis now. And this really puts social spending as a very strong economic case. They are not an act of benevolence or the residual policy. They are now, and they should be, at the center of the spending priorities, because they have a productivity growth, they contribute to your GDP, they contribute to employment and reducing poverty. So COVID has actually given a very strong economic case for the social spending. So this is some of the work. We have a very detailed analysis in the full report that we'll be sharing. But the measures of fiscal stimulus have a direct or indirect impact on a large, wide range of SDGs targets. And this is just a very quick summary of transferred to low-income households, and they have impact on poverty, hunger, and other. And we have also given the major transmission channels. We hope this can help better assessment of moving forward, that how the social spendings can help achieve the SDGs agenda in itself. Actually, they are at the core of the SDGs agenda. So these are just quick 4 proposals for Pakistan, and more aligned and almost similar to what Hamza has said. Pakistan must increase social spending and expand social protection as a major economic policy decision. Actually, it should be the central economic policy, not as a residual policy, right? It is now. Pakistan must continue to push for mass vaccination. This is what Dr. Shamshad Sahab has highlighted also. And this is very critical for countries like Pakistan, where informal sector is hugely, overwhelmingly prevalent. And most of the implied labor there, or most of the work there, is requires in-person presence, and absence of a vaccination. We can keep sort of blocks, and the lockdowns are the obstacles to the continuity of the work. We'll keep, because as Dr. Shamshad said, we will continue to have these new mutants coming. So vaccination will be critical, and vaccination inequality actually will be leading to economic inequality and other forms of inequalities. And a balanced green funding in order to ensure transition towards green recovery is critical. And finally, if it has to forward looking, this is the digital transformation is central. And this is what Dr. Shamshad Sahib also highlighted, that the impact of COVID-19 was differentiated across the different segments of society. And so were the gains from the fiscal policy responses or the stimulus. So this will be critical. So impact of, this is exactly the model on social protection, health, and education. We do both financing and non-financing criteria. I mean, if there are no financing constraints, and if there are financing constraints, the orange color gives when there are financing constraints, financed. But in all cases, if you see, the GDP increases, the impact on inflation is there, impact on GDP, debt is lower in the long run. It reduces its minor impact, because we are assuming that much of this kind of the fiscal space can be created by reducing the inefficiencies. I'll be just showing some numbers. Unemployment rate declines actually by a good percentage point to the base in the absence if we spend on, and it reduces the poverty rate as well. Hamza has also given some numbers, and these are the good numbers for Pakistan as well. And particularly this is in Pakistan, it has even the double importance. That when we are going through a going back to a tight monetary and tight fiscal policy, social spendings will be very critical, particularly on the social protection in the short run, and then health and education in the medium to long term. So we net gain are positive spending on the social protection and health and education. Similarly, investing in green recovery has a very strong economic case for Pakistan. So far, the discussion in Pakistan on green investments is more or less a kind of a case for that it improves environment, it improves nature. But at the same time, it has a very strong economic case. There is very growing evidence that $1 spent in fossil fuels produces 1 job, but that in renewable energy produces 7.4 jobs. And these can be a number also coming from the Pakistan, because it effectively reduces unemployment rates. At the same time, this is what Hamza was also saying, that it reduces the environmental adverse impacts. And if you see bottom last 2 bars, it hugely reduces impact on air pollution and impact on carbon emissions. It reduces poverty rate, increases employment, reduces unemployment rate, and impact on GDP in terms of percentage difference from the base is very strong. And it grows as you move. You make investments right now, you gain for the longer periods, and the collective gains are much higher. So this is where the financing needs come, that where you will be having the financing coming from. If currently Pakistan is spending roughly 0.6% on social protection, and it needs roughly 2.76 points. So you need to have a 2.14% of GDP additional, and so this is how it goes in terms of education and health as well, if you see. So there is a huge investments requirements, definitely, and this is where the difficult challenges for countries like Pakistan comes, where there is a very limited fiscal space. If you have to, Pakistan needs to balance green recovery, but financing needs for green transportation only by 2030 are $38.5 billion, roughly $3.85 a year by till 2030. But this is also possibility that there's a good share coming from the private sector. The 13.5 billion are expected or estimated potential to be coming from the private sector, and we have this incorporated this in the model as well. And this is a flexible model. You can change this ratio and see what is happening to the debts and other economic indicators. Finally, again, for the digital recovery, Pakistan need till 2030 $56.6 billion. Sounds a huge amount. The public sector has to come with the $20.6 billion, and $34 billion can come from, there is a potential estimated under different scenarios and different studies. But overall, as Hamza, kind of the fiscal space is remain to be limited there. So that is why you have to have some innovative ideas, green bonds, social impact bonds, and debt swaps. This one, not much is expected from the kind of FBR tax revenues, if history is any guide. But I'll just cutting it down, improving tax base. For example, I'll just give one example that there is a huge space for non-FBR taxes. You know, you can see the right, left green part, the total property tax revenue built in for this year's budget is around 210 billion, 210 billions for the Pakistan across the year, fiscal year. Only Mumbai collected in Pakistani rupee terms 120 billion of property tax. And from Karachi, it was around 1.73 billions. Number may vary from different sources. I'm sure Ashfaq Tola Sahab can guide us much more. But it is just to highlight that there is a huge space. So don't tell that there is no margin for revenue increase in Pakistan. There are many revenues. This is only where Dr. Hamza's point comes again, that this is the political will that you need to get through it. Only property tax can give a huge amount in terms of revenues. Saving even transport and energy sector efficiencies can create huge resources. In 2000, country roughly spent 1.7 billion and 0.2 billion on the coal and oil subsidies. If you can cut them 35% or the 50% and gradually 75%, they can save you more than $1 billion a year. Again, in energy and sectors, roughly 4 to 6% of GDP can be saved, and this is roughly $12.5 billion to 18, around $19 billion. So if you can save only 35% of them, so this can give you around $11 billion a year. So a green recovery is even creating space of fiscal space within the sector as well. The political commitment will be the critical. Similarly, this is the final, that exports, we have put it in the medium to long term because definitely it will take. But if we can increase only in next 3 to 4 years our exports from currently 9% around to 14%, this can create an additional amount of $19 billion a year. And the higher scenarios are also there, but the minimum scenario 1 can be can give you fiscal space. So these are some of the out of box that Pakistan has been thinking. have already been covered: green stimulus, green Eurobond, debt for nature, ecosystem restoration fund, but they need to be scaled up at a very low scale right now. So this is some of the work on which this presentation has been based. We have been doing with UNESCAP and some other collaborations. Thank you. I'm sorry I have taken still more time than allocated to me. Thank you. So let me now, with the permission of the chair, invite Dr. Ashfaq. Tola Sab has to go. Actually, and still we have. I'm sure he is already late. At the time he actually gave us. Sir, we are so thankful to you for staying with us. Sir, you can pick on any point while, but it will be good how to finance. I've been following your very recent work on living without IMF and creating fiscal spaces. So I think this can be a good point to start, that how we can finance this recovery, and particularly without IMF. That will be very critical. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Hamza, and I think economists, Pakistan, those who have grip on Pakistan's economy, and Hamza is now, I think when I met him last, he was having a grip in Pakistan's economy, but now he's having a grip on the regional economy, and I'm happy to know, and I can see a future finance minister in him for Pakistan. Hamza, very well done, and I'm extremely grateful to SDPI for inviting me on this session, where we have got three very important presentations before we start or we trigger this discussion on the resilience of recovery of economy. I mean, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar has always been second to none. Was really very thoughtful. Hamza, practical, and I know he's a practical guy like me, and obviously he gives a practical solution. Sajid Saab, you always prefer to give a very decent talk, and I know you. Your last moderation on the seminar was also very good. But let me just tell you, as Hamza has said, I'll take it forward for the rest of the panelists to discuss. Actually, I have to go to a funeral prayers of one of our good friends. His mother passed away. So I'm going there. Nonetheless, I'm giving you a brief presentation or maybe some food for thought. As you said, Dr. Sajid, that I wrote an article on how to survive without IMF. I know it's a bitter pill to swallow when you have got a chair like Dr. Shamshad, and he will vehemently oppose this, without IMF you can't do. Nonetheless, this is something which we need to understand, which we need to think. Obviously, I know there are most of the world who is surviving IMF, but it is not the end of the world. We know that things when we are in the program of IMF. Nonetheless, in my humble view, we have seen so many IMF programs in the last 2 decades, and we have seen a lot of recoveries during the program as well. But this time we are unfortunate that we were unable to manage those recoveries. I mean, we all have to agree this. My point is, I wrote this article first in February 2020, and it was a thought-provoking for the then Finance Minister, Dr. Api Sheikh, like an elder brother, but really वो मुझ पे नाराज हो गए, बोले यार तुमने लिखा क्यों? तो I said, sir, माफ करते हैं, मेरी गलती हो गई है. Now again, with this chaos happening in the economy of Pakistan, I think, this was my duty to just give just a thought to the policy makers. But I know they have deaf ears and they will not listen to or they will not read to me. No problem. I'll just keep on hearing my views. देखिए हमारी economy जो है, इसके बड़े important dynamics है. Dr. Hamza must have seen so many economies in the world. Dr. Shamshad, obviously, she knows so many countries. But our economy has a different dynamics. We have got a huge parallel base of economy. And that is the bottleneck of our recovery. I mean, let me tell you, कोई भी आप step उठा के देख लें, हमारी सारी इकोनॉमी की जो पंच लाइन होती है, that boils down to only one thing, that is parallel. We've got a huge parallel base in agriculture, in trading, and especially in real estate. Unless we bring most of it into mainstream economy, we cannot book copy the total model of maybe IMF or maybe any other model which is in place right now in the world. So हमारी जो deviation चाहिए जो हमें, that is because of the parallel economy. And we've done not much in last 2 decades कि आप उसको mainstream economy. ये point था when I was part of Tax Reforms Commission. In fact, I was the one who authored that report. And since 2016, it is in the shelf. आज तक आपके सामने कहीं नहीं आई होगी. डॉक्टर साहब को तो मैंने दे दिया था when she was finance minister for caretaker setup. Dr. Sajid के पास भी है. But what I'm saying, by and large, we need to implement those taxes. They entail everything about how to recover and how to bring this parallel economy into mainstream. So why we are shying away? It is, I mean, सबसे बड़ा मसला ये है हमारा कि हमारी जियोपॉलिटिकल कंडीशन तो भले भी कोई हो, मगर हमारी इंटरनल पॉलिटिकल कंडीशन इज एब्सोल्युटली वल्नरेबल. Our economy is not resilient. We are having an effervescent economy which we are having. कि हम बबली इकोनॉमी पे ट्रैवल कर रहे होते हैं बम्पी राइड्स के साथ. We go to 5.8, then we come down to -0.3. I share the point of Dr. Sajid. मुझे एक चीज समझ नहीं आ रही थी when we just look at those political statements of our honorable leaders like Prime Minister even, that हम अगर क्लोज कर देंगे तो हमारी इकोनॉमी बहुत मार खाएगी. From March 2020 till June 30th, 2020, virtually we all have to agree कि वो virtually closure था पाकिस्तान. Am I right, sir? जब वो closure था, so just look at the GDP figure. Hamza, it's a thought provoking for you. My GDP given in was -0., and the revision is -0.47. So in 1 quarter, the difference is only 0.09%. What is the cost of shutdown? And then from there I picked Dr. Sajid that the actual negative GDP growth was much more than that. Market estimate was 2.2, but he is a step ahead to me. When we estimated this -0.38 in April, I was criticized by my own friends that this is a biased opinion. I said no, this is a real opinion, and time will tell. When the figure of 0.38, negative figure was declared by the government. So आपकी जो भी इकोनॉमी है, मैं ये कहता हूँ रियल वर्ल्ड में आपको देखना पड़ेगा और पहले आपको अपने इश्यूज को एड्रेस करना पड़ेगा. I can work out the fancy numbers, बड़े अच्छे ग्राफ में बना के प्रेजेंट कर दूंगा, but what we have in real life. आज हम एक नई चीज सुन रहे होते हैं. मैंने अब्दुल्ला को और आपको भेजा, एक स्क्रीन में उधर शेयर कर दे. So this is the reality. हम रिटॉरिक दे रहे हैं कि जी दुनिया में महंगाई है. We all know. But can we progress or can we give a bounce back to our economy by following the IMF recipe? I think the answer is no. I mean, we have been given to understand कि हमारी इकोनॉमी बहुत ज्यादा इन्फ्लेटेड है just because of the fact कि दुनिया में इन्फ्लेशन है और अर्जेंटाइन में हमसे ज्यादा इन्फ्लेशन है, टर्की में हमसे ज्यादा इन्फ्लेशन है, ब्राजील is also ahead of us. But can we justify this inflation when we say that what is the per capita income of Pakistan? What is the purchasing power per capita in Pakistan? No. So we cannot give the example. We have to compare an apple with an apple. by giving these examples? Or we are just making a case out of nothing? Answer is yes, we are making a case out of nothing just to pacify the nation. कि यार हम अकेले नहीं हैं, दुनिया मार खा रही है. But this is not the truth. ठीक है, टर्की की भी आपकी बड़ी डिवैल्यूएशन हुई है, अब अर्जेंटीना की भी काफी हुई है. But do you think कि are you competitive in the region? Next slide अगर जरा सा अगला पेज दे दें प्लीज. थोड़ा सा मूव कर देंगे डॉक्टर अब्दुल्ला. Yes. Now just compare the region. क्या हम इस रीजन को कंपेयर कर सकें? And what is the sole reason for that? It is not the महंगाई alone. It is not the international commodity prices alone. The main factor is the devaluation. And why we have a devaluation, rampant devaluation at all? Because of the fact we want to follow the principle of greed. Yes, follow it, but follow it rigorously. When we follow it and when we leave everything on demand and supply mechanism, then don't cry over the spoiled milk. आज रील को देखने, Honorable Finance Minister is saying that it is 164, 165, maybe around that. Calculation मेरे पास अभी नहीं है. The official interbank rate is 177, and he is saying that speculators are doing the trick. What is the purpose of government then? Not to control the speculation or give them a free hand? No. We have a huge parallel economy, as I said. So we cannot follow the model of IMF. And this was crux of my article. That what we have to revisit the interest rates. We have to revisit the factor. So rampant devaluation, if we go, Dr. Shamshad, I know you must be laughing at me and you will not spare me next time. But let me just take out my vent. I am venting whatever I have to say. Nonetheless, मैं ये कहता हूँ अभी भी कि I am a proponent और मैंने ये करके दिखाया था in the previous regime. Dr. Sarwar knows this. 111 से 94 पे लेके आया था, and not illegally so. With very much legal factors. Your currency companies, Hamza, you can second me. Your currency companies are allowed to import. Don't second me, but second me that the way I am discussing with you now. This is what Dr. Ishwar Hussain has done in 2000. I know the history, I know the archive, and you can see me at the State Bank since 1992. बात ये है आपको कि कौवा हंस की चाल नहीं चल सकता. Interest rate, every percentage point is causing you 262 billion rupees of fiscal deficit. Can we? If we are in the program, we have to see certain benchmarks. But at what cost? With this NFC award, of when we are dishing out almost 60% to the provinces and GB and Kashmir, can we manage this much of fiscal deficit? No, we cannot. And it is very fancy to say that we have to increase the tax base. Do you know, if we go for Schwarzenegger or maybe zero tax budgeting, you know what is going to be your tax target with this sort of a NFC award? 16,000 billion. Do you have the capacity? 200. When 38.5% of your GDP is not contributing or insignificantly contributing towards your direct tax. So are we moving in the right direction? We have used very good initiative. Obviously, State Bank has done a lot during this COVID season. But I can recall the statement of my honorable governor when he said that क्या एक बीमारी की वजह से मैं क्या interest rate कम करूं, and then subsequently he reduced it from 13.5% to 7%, and which paid off. We need to soul search. Where is my politics? Where is my political economy? Where am I? Can I follow this principle of IMF program or I have to get out of it? In my humble view, we have to soul search. मैं अभी ये काम कर रहा हूँ SDPI के साथ. डॉक्टर साहब आप तो हमेशा मेरे साथ ही रहती है, हमजा भी रहेंगे और सारे डॉक्टर्स को मैं कहता हूँ, we are working ICAP as a vice president ICAP and as chair of economy and economic advisory and government relations committee. We are initiating a very thoughtful session on charter of economy. We'll be framing issues, help us, and then we will take up this case to the political parties that come and reply this. Whenever you are in the government, you just forget this. Whenever you are in opposition, you just propagate it. So take a single stance and adopt a similar policy for Pakistan. Mark my word, with these policies, you can never recover your economy. We were in the middle of secondary economic stage. All of a sudden, we offered a budget of loot sales. We reduced everything, every duty, and especially on motor vehicles. We have imported vehicles CBU worth $3.61 billion. Now we are propagating, going into figures and details. We have to soul search the basic framework of economy. We can read from everywhere. Every book is there. And by the way, economics is an art, not a science. Yes, we can project very fancily, but at the end of the day, I think we need to soul search from our own perspective. Tax reform is the key, economic reforms are the key, and obviously charter of economy is one of the main factors which we need to address. Agriculture tax on traders, they all are the need of the hours. With these words, I am extremely grateful to SDPI again for inviting me, and I am sorry if I have hurt anyone. ये आप लोगों का ताबुन चाहिए मुझे, और ये हम करेंगे हमारे पाकिस्तान में. देखिए मेरा पाकिस्तान में जो स्टेक है ना वो बहुत ज्यादा है, इसलिए कि मेरे बच्चे भी बाहर से पढ़ के पाकिस्तान आ गए, वहीं पे काम कर रहे हैं. तो प्लीज ये हमें पाकिस्तानियत के तौर पर सोचना है, नॉट एज अ प्रोफेशनल. हमारे इंटरेस्ट, ये सब बैठे हुए पैनलिस्ट को मैं देखता हूँ, उनका कोई पर्सनल इंटरेस्ट नहीं है जो यहाँ बैठे हैं, सारा पाकिस्तान इंटरेस्ट है हमारा. तो वी हैव टू स्टेप फॉरवर्ड. हमजा कम बैक. Thank you very much, Pakistan.
Ashfaq sir, thank you so very much. Very good question.
Please, I beg your leave because I have to attend the funeral today. Okay? Thank you.
Question needs a full day discussion. जो आपने सवाल उठाए हैं, तो हम इंशाल्लाह जो आपके साथ कर रहे हैं आने वाले टाइम में will keep these questions there. Thank you so much.
ये क्वेश्चन है ना, ये आप अगर देना चाहें मुझे ईमेल पे देते, we can circulate it. We can reply and you can circulate among the participants.
No, I mean you have very big questions, raised big questions, और उनमें से हर एक सवाल जो है उसको पूरे दिन की डिस्कशन चाहिए. We'll come back later, sir. Thank you so much. और I'm sorry, we are already out of our time almost. Not almost, actually, really. So let me just request again our remaining panelists to be very generous with us, and if you can wind up in earliest possible that you can. It's my very humble request. So let me bring State Bank of Pakistan, because I'm told that they have some other meeting to go as well. Akhtiar Ahmed Saab, Senior Joint Director, State Bank of Pakistan.
Assalamu alaikum ji.
Sir, if you can in 5 minutes, I'll be personally obliged.
Yes, thank you. Am I audible, Dr. Saab?
Yes, please, you are.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, esteemed panelists. Sorry, due to a technical glitch, my camera has stopped working at the very last minute. But anyway, I'll quickly skim through what I have to say at this conference. I want to begin by thanking SDPI for inviting State Bank in its Sustainable Development Conference on lessons learned from the pandemic. You know, pandemic was a wake-up call for everyone, including financial institutions. Yes, we have had, human lives were lost, and as Dr. Hamza rightly stated that economic output was lost as well. But at the same time, it gives us a very unique opportunity to build back better and to build back stronger. So it gives me an immense pleasure to be part of such a diversified group of panelists, for exchanging ideas and experiences on sustainable development. As rightly pointed out by Dr. Shamshad, sustainability as a goal has become mainstream in many sectors, including financial industry. Financing for promoting sustainable development has become the need of the hour. I believe to make transition to such a green economy, specific enabling environment or conditions are required, which actually makes these green sectors an attractive opportunity for investors and businesses. As we are all well aware that Pakistan's economy is currently facing numerous challenges, including adverse impact of climate change. It is an imminent threat to people, society, environment, as well as Pakistan's economy. To overcome this challenge, it's an immense challenge. State Bank of Pakistan has been proactively promoting green banking to encourage financial industry for adoption of green and sustainable banking practices. Under the umbrella of green banking, we have taken several initiatives, both on the developmental side. We issued a financing scheme for renewable energy projects in the country. This particular initiative is aligned with the SDG Goal 7. As you all know, it's ensuring access to affordable and sustainable energy. Based on the positive feedback from relevant stakeholders, we revised the scheme in July 2019, and similarly, we also introduced an Islamic version of the same in order to cater to the faith-sensitive clients. See, the objective of this scheme is to promote clean energy projects and meet electricity demand through renewable energy sources, and at the same time, it is aligned with the government of Pakistan's goal to convert 60% of the energy needs into renewable energy. And I'm very delighted to share that we're seeing great response from the market. Just to throw in some numbers, the renewable energy financing has skyrocketed since the last year. Just last year, in June 2020, the amount of spending was 15 billion. At the end of June 2021, we are at 53 billion. So we can see there has been a substantial increase in just 1 year. About 700 projects have been financed so far, and it has the potential of adding around 1,000 megawatts of energy supplied through the renewable energy sources. So that was from the developmental side. What we've done on the regulatory side is that we have issued green banking guidelines in October 2017. Just to give you a quick glimpse of what it contains basically environmental risk management, green business facilitation, and banks' own impact reduction. Environmental risk management is a very integral part of these guidelines, as it encourages banks to integrate environmental risk into banks' credit risk management for increasing financial stability through management and mitigation of environmental exposures of financing portfolios. It is the most important component of green banking, and it is designed to incorporate procedures for evaluation and management of environmental and climate change risks of current as well as future financing or investments of banks in credit risk management procedures. Currently, many banks have actually established their environmental risk management procedures and developed environmental due diligence checklists and risk ratings to better evaluate and manage environmental and climate change risks. To transition to a green economy, it is very important that the banks have to first actually identify through how much they are basically causing through their loans or through their investments, they are causing environmental or climate change risk. Green business facilitation, the second component of the green banking guidelines, it encourages banks to facilitate environmental friendly green businesses. This particular area has been designed to align the focus of the banking industry's investments with SDGs, including focus on clean water and sanitation, which is SDG Goal 6, affordable and clean energy, which is SDG Goal 7, and sustainable cities and communities, etc. I'm very happy to share again that several banks have established strategies for facilitation of green businesses by including a policy statement for allocation of funding resources to those businesses that directly or indirectly want to improve their carbon footprint. Banks are also working on their own in developing its green products. On impact reduction, basically, the green banking guidelines guide banks and the financial industry to reduce their impact on the environment through conscious management of their consumption of energy and other resources, which again indicates compliance of SDG Goal 12, responsible consumption. The activities under this component may include, just to give you a few examples, it may include usage of paperless banking operations and services.
Ikhtiar, may I request you please wrap up? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll just wrap it up quickly. So some of the examples that I was talking include usage of paperless banking operations and services, etc. Now to go further, since these guidelines were issued in 2017 and it required an update, so we have recently initiated Pakistan Sustainable Banking Project in collaboration with IFC. The goal is to improve existing green banking guidelines and also to increase the share and volume of banks' loans under the green banking domain. The project is based on 3 phases. First is to develop implementation tools of the LPP green banking guidelines and to raise awareness and capacity of the entire banking industry and create market capacity for local training intermediaries. We are in the first phase currently, and we are very positive about the outcome of this project. That will be it from my side, Dr. Sajid.
Thank you, and we are so sorry pushing you a bit fast on the pace. Dr. Nadia, over to you. Dr. Nadia is consultant with ADB and has been covering a multi-range research and public policy issues on her work. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Sajid Saab. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you, UNESCAP and SDPI. Although I'm not feeling well today, but I have noted down a few points. A lot have already been said from the earlier panelists, so my focus would be narrow and precise based on the shared questions. Well, I had seen an Excel-based macro model shared by Hamza last year. I really appreciate the work done by the whole team. Well, the issues in our economy are very clear and solutions are also not hidden from anyone. The dilemma is that our politics take the front seat and our economy remains in the back seat. You see, for example, FBR says that whenever we try to change the evaluation table, then real estate tycoons come and warn about dharna and stuff like that. So we are facing huge issues with the current account balance, which is understood after every hike in growth. Why have we allowed a big relief in the imports of cars, as Ashfaq Saab has already mentioned? Well, if we are importing too much, then on parallel, we should increase the exports, even though the government has revised the duty schedule, but it is too late now. The second point which I want to highlight here is that we are an oil inelastic economy and facing severe issues of IPPs. So our policies should be designed in the same way. Coal is now out of fashion. We started Bhasha Dam in the time of Musharraf. What has happened till now? None. I mean, nothing. We can't see anything happened materialistically. So if we still have to make electricity through oil, then wherever the economy goes up, we will face the same issues which we are facing now. The third point is inflation, which is nowadays an international phenomenon, but we have had this issue before this universal crisis. The problem is that when the oil prices get increased by 5%, then commodity prices get up by 7%. Why 2%? Unfortunately, there is no mechanism to tackle this issue. If producers can collude, then why not government take action against them? The quality of our products is also not competitive. Unfortunately, the one who imports from us once, most of the time they do not import next. So this is government's job to do work on it. My last point would be that we had seen a rise of almost 12% in manufacturing sector last year, but that does not translate into our exports. Where did those items gone? Do we have a high demand domestically? If so, then why we always complain about the pores in the society? We have lost our credibility in front of IMF and other multilateral institutions, as we always mention about the poor population and their miseries. In fact, we do not work for them. So my suggestions would be that the solution is very fundamental. Number one, to increase exports. Number two, to increase savings. Without increasing both of these, we can never solve the issues. Whenever growth comes up, we don't have savings to capture, and ultimately we take more local or foreign loans. We can learn from the leading examples of Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, how they have increased their exports. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nadia, double thanks for very precise points and saving us a couple of minutes. And definitely the growth structure of Pakistan does not support saving. When I was asked that what is the biggest risk to Pakistan's economy, I think a higher growth rate is the biggest risk with this composition that we do have. And thank you highlighting it once again. I'll be coming later to Dr. Imtiaz Saab, but let me just invite to Dr. Shahid Naeem Saab for his chief international trade today's, but most relevant to today's discussion, SDG's localization work was being done in Pakistan. Dr. Shahid Naeem was heading that. He was chief SDGs. Sir, over to you. What has been government doing on this one, and what can be done based on your previous experience in SDGs? Over to you, sir. Hear us, please. Shah Saab, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear Shah Saab. Can you check? Okay. I'm told that there is a voice in the technical guy. Can we hear us, all of you panelists? None of us is able to hear. No. Shah Saab, we cannot hear you, unfortunately. No, still. Can you unmute yourself, please? Maybe you are muted.
Hello.
Can hear now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Almost all of the points that I noted for discussion today have already been discussed in one way or the other, for or against. So I will only take up 2 or 3 issues and then hand it over back to you. Knowing that COVID had impacted everyone and my economy from various perspectives. Knowing that Bureau of Statistics informed us that only in the first year, 21 million workers were impacted due to the COVID. And knowing that bulk of them reported that they had to reduce their non-food expenditure to move forward. Knowing that 3/4 of the workforce in Pakistan is in informal sector, and we didn't have a registry of informal workers at the time when it was needed, although the labor expert group earlier to that had already recommended to the government that we should have a live registry of informal workers so that in cases like COVID, we could do some targeted interventions. I'm pleased to inform that now Ministry of Poverty has established a labor-related unit in that ministry, and that has prioritized this task as one of its first assignment. So soon you will see that informal workers will have a process, a portal, and in future governments will be able to direct measures for them. We also know that the new national socio-economic static registries, now individuals will be able to register, come inside or get out of the registry all throughout the year based on a specific process. We've talked about the impact of the government's stimulus package of 1.2 trillion. If you look at the breakup of that, 200 billion for daily wage workers, 50 billion for utility stores, 70 billion rupees for relief in fuel prices, 15 billion support for health and food, 110 billion relief for electricity bills for businesses and for individuals, 100 billion emergency contingency fund. You see, all these were directed towards achieving or towards supporting SDGs 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, inequality 10. So the whole stimulus package was directed in line with the sustainable development. Then Dr. Shamshad referred to our fragile and insufficient health system. Had this 25 billion transfer to NDMA for purchase of necessary equipment not been there, it would have been a disaster, So that investment in the health system has paid off to some extent. Similarly, State Bank's initiatives for deferring the payment of principal loan, increasing regulatory limit to on extension of credit to SMEs, and many others. They have helped in sustaining the businesses. The policy of smart lockdowns instead of full lockdowns in the cities, all these were has helped in sustaining to some extent the economy. Very rightly said that there is a huge financing gap. There is a huge financing gap, despite the fact that the priorities also need to be aligned with the SDGs. I hope you know that now every PC1 has one-page annexure with it to assess how much that project would contribute to achieving SDGs. So in one way, the monitoring of development expenditure is going to start soon, and we'll be able to see how much of the development fund is going. Similarly, in case of health sector for supporting SDG 3, the Prime Minister's Health Insurance Initiative is going to work a lot in the future. And similarly, the one decision, the bulk of the dropouts in education system was at primary level. So this one decision to promote all primary schools into middle will at least give a boost to education system, and we hope that the now completion to grade 8 would be achieved hopefully. Another very important initiative was the creation of NCOC, which had been taking stock of COVID situation day by day and has been taking decisions. With regard to vaccination, the NCOC reports that almost 55 million people have been fully immunized, while more than 100 million people have got one shot of the vaccination. A total of 130 million vaccine doses have been administered so far. So these are some of the highlights of the actions that government has taken. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shahid Saab, for bringing us what government has been doing. And one of the most important point coming is that every PC1 will be having a SDGs alignment form point coming so that people can see that what is happening, what the government is planning, what are the gains. But thank you so very much. On the vaccination, definitely, it has been more than expected, but still there is a very huge vaccine hesitancy, particularly in the vulnerable groups and the marginalized. So thank you so very much for bringing us this. This brings us to the concluding remarks before I invite our very honorable session chair to let me go to Dr. Imtiaz Saab for his thoughts from the Ministry of Finance, which is actually the center of this financing economic recovery. Over to you, sir. And we are so sorry that we have taken, we have made you wait longer than what we committed actually with you.
Sir, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Are you hearing me, sir? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the SDPI for providing us an opportunity to listen the valuable discussion of Dr. Shehnaz Akhtar, Dr. Hamza Malik, Dr. Sajid Saab, and Ashfaq Tola Saab, and Dr. Nadia Farooq. inviting me to say a few words on the panel toward post-COVID resilient economies, which is organized in collaboration with the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I think this is very useful discussion on evidence-based fiscal policies for sustainable recovery from COVID-19 and how the SDPI UNESCAP work can help in this regard. It is my profound privilege and pleasure to speak on this distinguished gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, fiscal policy, as we know, has an effective role in promoting sustainable and inclusive growth. A well-structured fiscal policy ensures the efficient allocation of public resources. It encourages effective public spending and creates fiscal space for priority investment, thus create a favorable environment for achieving higher economic growth. The role of fiscal policy is very important in delivering the sustainable development goals. It can mobilize domestic resources, encourage efficient use of public spending, stimulate private investment, and improve consumer behavior, thus help in achieving SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic had impacted the whole world, as it was health as well as economic crisis. In order to address the health-led economic crisis, countries around the world responded swiftly with a variety of policy measures, largely in the form of monetary and fiscal interventions for the economy and health-related measures for the pandemic. On the fiscal side, government helped household and business in the form of transfer, wage subsidies, and liquidity support. These measures were supplemented with other aspects of social safety nets. All these policy actions contributed significantly to lessen the economic impact of COVID-19 and protected the global economy from further deterioration. The pandemic has posed a significant challenge to achieve the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. Here I would like to mention the of Asia and Pacific 2021 in implementing the transformative 2030 agenda for sustainable development has increased vulnerability to shocks. The countries should prioritize stronger alignment of the COVID-19 recovery packages with the 2030 agenda. According to the survey 2021, all policy options are numerous and diverse. Asia Pacific countries must focus on those that maximize their strength and are feasible given their institutional capacities. It is therefore urgent that every country utilize its limited fiscal resources in the most efficient way, relying on comprehensive analysis to assess the best course of action. Coming over to a few points on fiscal policy in Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, like the whole world, Pakistan's economy has affected by the COVID and its economic growth contracted by 0.47 in the year 2020. The government focused on reducing economic losses and maintaining the social and economic well-being of the affected and vulnerable segments of the society. On fiscal side, largest ever stimulus package was announced that covers the allocation of emergency response, support to business, and relief to citizens. This package was also complemented by liquidity support for the industry, especially SMEs from State Bank of Pakistan, The government's efficient and timely measure against the pandemic allowed economic activities to continue in the difficult time. As a result, in fiscal year 2021, economy has witnessed a V-shaped recovery. The trend of core economic indicators are encouraging and the growth for the ongoing fiscal year seems on a higher path as compared to previous years. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan is following a fiscal consolidation strategy with a view to improve revenues and controlling non-productive expenditure. The fiscal strategy of Pakistan strikes a careful balance between supporting the economy and commitment to fiscal consolidation. In this regard, the fiscal policy measures are largely focused on relief measures to support business and to protect vulnerable segments of society. It also aims at enhancing development spending across various sectors like agriculture, industry, and social sector development. During the present recovery phase, in the post-COVID scenario, the fiscal policy is focused on investment in infrastructure, both physical and digital, with an emphasis on green initiatives, investment in human capital, including skills, and capacity enhancement of human resource. Ladies and gentlemen, to further strengthen the economic gain and to achieve higher and inclusive and sustainable economic growth, government has set its priority in the budget 2021-22 across different sectors such as agriculture package, industrial package, incentive for export promotion, ease of doing business reforms, investment promotion strategy, and Prime Minister's package for construction, Kamyab Pakistan program. Moreover, initiatives on environmental side have also been launched, like Green and Clean Pakistan movement, electric vehicle policy, and green economic stimulus. Here, I would also like to mention that as a macroeconomic model developed by SDPI and UNESCAPE to support the design of economic recovery package for countries in the Asia and Pacific region offers insight how countries can build resilience in the post-COVID-19 era, while enhancing sustainability along economic, social, and environmental dimensions. I also appreciate the SDPI's study based on this model with an aim to support the government in designing and implementing evidence-based fiscal policies to enable and sustain a fair and green recovery from COVID-19 in Pakistan. Their objective is to support and strengthen policies which are necessary to improve the socio-economic welfare of people. Suggestions of the study are very useful to uplift socio-economic condition of the common man space. At the end, I would like to thank everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Imtiaz, for bringing us perspective from Finance, Ministry of Finance. And thank you for appreciating our work. And we do hope to continue this collaboration and actually the practical use of that model in collaboration with you, Ministry of Finance and other ministries. I really thank you. Just let me now go back to our session chair. Ma'am, back to you for your concluding thoughts. I thank you, all of you, on behalf of SDPI and UNESCAP as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for for inviting me, and also, like it was just said a while back by Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, I think SDPI is really shaping up as one of the instrumental think tanks, and with this very large gathering that you have been able to assemble, and the diversity of the subject matters that you have brought to the table. And as was pointed out, I mean, we have to really start thinking independent of the multilateral institution and the system. And I think it's very refreshing that all of us really were presenting perspectives on the economy from our own perspective, and not necessarily the fund, IMF, or for that matter, the World Bank and ADB. I think some of these institutions have lost their way, and hence it's important we need to work together. I know Hamza always was critical, but I am joining his ranks lately, sitting in Pakistan and watching the performance of the multilaterals. But coming back to the subject matter, I think we have really benefited from very rich present. I have to compliment Hamza. He's true to his discipline and, as usual, very exhaustive presentation and very instrumental insights into the Asia Pacific SDG scenario. I'm not going to go into the details of any presentation because of the time constraint, but I need to also compliment you, Sajid Amin Saab, because your paper I had already read since it was submitted earlier. That was the only paper I read of this event, and I felt that it's important that we really generate this kind of work for the benefit of the country's policymakers. Whether they listen to us or not is a separate matter. I think they get a huge body of advice, but I would very much recommend that Dr. Sajid Saab, if you can really put together a couple of pages of the main messages of this particular session and share with us at least the speakers, so that we could make sure that we could, if we have to add some more value to it, we could do that. But we do so for Pakistan context only, so that I just want to spoke the least, but she made the best contribution, as they say. You know, small is always beautiful, and it came through in the brevity that she used. So, as I said, I'm not going to try to summarize the content of everybody's thing, because that could take me longer. But the key message was that we are late in implementing the Sustainable Development Agenda, and we need to accelerate the pace of Sustainable Development Agenda. And the role, the significance of Sustainable Development Agenda in strengthening the resilience of the economy has been well acknowledged by every speaker, as I see. And it's important that we keep in mind some of the slides of the frequency of the crisis episodes and the cost of it that Asia Pacific has faced, but the world has faced. And I think we should really acknowledge that Pakistan not only faces, is at the frontier of facing some of these international shocks, but Pakistan generates its own unique shocks for itself. And what are the consequences of that? So Hamza and I will have a debate about it, and I hope Hamza can put his team to analyze that, so that we can, in your next SDPI, contribute that paper to our Pakistani authorities of what causes. My last point, which I think is very important, that I think I'm more and more convinced, sitting in Pakistan now, we should be thinking about what can be that there is so much learning from the private sector, and we should focus more and more in trying to augment really the private sector, because there is so much substance in the private sector of Pakistan, and somehow we need to unleash the potential of the private sector, because I mean, I have been working more on the private sector issues in what I do, because I'm not necessarily working with the government, but I'm working with private entities, which is by design, because I feel there is so much action that's happening. And I've stopped writing papers, by the way. I do more real work on the ground. So my suggestion to everybody is that these papers do not have any major value proposition in Pakistan, but we really need to roll our sleeves and work with the civil society to transform our economy. So I'm going to stop here. Sorry, my throat is bad, so I can't really talk more. And thank you, Sajid Saab. You have really contributed substantially, but I'm really indebted to Abid Suleri, who's a great contributor on every front, and I have managed to pick up so much from his working with the various civil society people and all that, and I think that makes a huge amount of difference. All the best to you all.
Ma'am, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Despite your bad throat, you have contributed the best of the that you can. I'm again thankful to all of you, and Hamza join me in thanking you all on behalf of SCAP and SDPI. And I'll be preparing a summary note on this one, and we will be sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, SDPI. Thank you, Dr. Akhtar.
Thank you, Dr. Nadia. Thank you, Dr. Imtiaz Saab. Thank you, Shahid Saab. And Akhyar Saab also. Thank you so very much.
Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you, ji. Allah Hafiz.